Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the August 2023 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook of The Socialization of Society, also known as What is Bolshevism, by Rosa Luxemburg. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So, The Socialization of Society is from December 1918. The source is Gesammelte Werke, Berlin, GDR, 1970-75, Volume 4, first published in Die Junge Garde, Berlin, numbers 2 and 4, December 1918. This version is translated by Dave Hollis. And after we get done with this version, The Socialization of Society, we're going to read the alternate translation, What is Bolshevism, which was translated by Sally Ryan for the Marxist Internet Archive. HTML transcription and markup by Dave Hollis and Brian Baggins, and thanks as usual to the Marxist Internet Archive, marxists.org, for hosting this and thousands of other free Marxist texts. We begin with a document introduction by MIA. It says, the question of how a future socialist society may look is scarcely found in the Marxist literature. Rosa Luxemburg took up this question in an article written in the heat of the revolution in December 1918. It was reproduced in various newspapers and journals, in the Hamburger Volkszeitung on 20th December 1918, in the Youth International, Stuttgart, on the 28th of December under the title German Bolshevism, and in the Volksblatt on the 6th of January 1919 under the title Nationalization. So let's begin, the socialization of society. The proletarian revolution that has now begun can have no other goal and no other result than the realization of socialism. The working class must above all else strive to get the entire political power of the state into its own hands. Political power, however, is for us socialists only a means. The end for which we must use this power is the fundamental transformation of the entire economic relations. Currently, all wealth, the largest and best estates, as well as the mines, works, and the factories, belongs to a few Junkers and private capitalists. The great mass of the workers only get from these Junkers and capitalists a meager wage to live on for hard work. The enrichment of a small number of idlers is the aim of today's economy. This state of affairs should be remedied. All social wealth, the land with all its natural resources hidden in its bowels and on the surface, and all factories and works must be taken out of the hands of the exploiters and taken into common property of the people. The first duty of a real workers' government is to declare by means of a series of decrees the most important means of production to be national property, and place them under the control of society. Only then, however, does the real and most difficult task begin, the reconstruction of the economy on a completely new basis. At the moment, production in every enterprise is conducted by individual capitalists on their own initiative. What, and in which way, is to be produced, where, when, and how the produced goods are to be sold is determined by the industrialist. The workers do not see to all this. They are just living machines who have to carry out the work. In a socialist economy, this must be completely different. The private employer will disappear. Then no longer production aims toward the enrichment of one individual, but of delivering to the public at large the means of satisfying all its needs. Accordingly, the factories, works, and the agricultural enterprises must be reorganized according to a new way of looking at things. Firstly, if production is to have the aim of securing for everyone a dignified life, plentiful food, and providing other cultural means of existence, then the productivity of labor must be a great deal higher than it is now. The land must yield a far greater crop, the most advanced technology must be used in the factories, only the most productive coal and ore mines must be exploited, etc. It follows from this that socialization will above all extend to the large enterprises in industry and agriculture. We do not need and do not want to dispossess the small farmer and craftsman eking out a living with a small plot of land or workshop. In time, they will all come to us voluntarily, and will recognize the merits of socialism as against private property. Secondly, in order that everyone in society can enjoy prosperity, everybody must work. Only somebody who performs some useful work for the public at large, whether by hand or brain, can be entitled to receive from society the means for satisfying their needs. A life of leisure, like most of the rich exploiters currently lead, will come to an end. A general requirement to work for all who are able to do so, from which small children, the aged and sick are exempted, is a matter of course in a socialist economy. The public at large must provide forthwith for those unable to work. Not like now with paltry alms, but with generous provision, socialized child raising, enjoyable care for the elderly, public health care for the sick, etc. Thirdly, in accordance with the same outlook, i.e. for the general well-being, one must sensibly manage and be economic with both the means of production and labor. The squandering that currently takes place wherever one goes must stop. Naturally, the entire war and munitions industries must be abolished, since a socialist society does not need murder weapons, and instead, the valuable materials and human labor used in them must be employed for useful products. Luxury industries, which make all kinds of frippery for the idle rich, must also be abolished, along with personal servants. All the human labor tied up here will be found a more worthy and useful occupation. If we establish in this way a nation of workers, where everybody works for everyone, for the public good and benefit, then work itself must be organized quite differently. Nowadays, work in industry, in agriculture, and in the office is mostly a torment and a burden for the proletarians. One only goes to work because one has to, because one would not otherwise get the means to live. In a socialist society, where everyone works together for their own well-being, the health of the workforce and its enthusiasm for work must be given the greatest consideration at work. Short working hours that do not exceed the normal capability, healthy workrooms, all methods of recuperation, and a variety of work must be introduced in order that everyone enjoys doing their part. All these great reforms, however, call for a corresponding human material. Currently, the capitalist, his work's foreman or supervisor, stands behind the worker with his whip. Hunger drives the proletarian to work in the factory or in the office, for the Junker or the big farmer. The employers take care that time is not frittered away, nor material wasted, and that both good and efficient work is delivered. In a socialist society, the industrialist with his whip ceases to exist. The workers are free and equal human beings who work for their own well-being and benefit. That means by themselves, working on their own initiative, not wasting public wealth, and delivering the most reliable and meticulous work. Every socialist concern needs, of course, its technical managers, who know exactly what they're doing and give the directives so that everything runs smoothly and the best division of labor and the highest efficiency is achieved. Now, it is a matter of willingly following these orders in full, of maintaining discipline and order, of not causing difficulties or confusion. In a word, the worker in a socialist economy must show that they can work hard and properly, keep discipline, and give their best without the whip of hunger, and without the capitalist and their slave driver behind them. This calls for inner self-discipline, intellectual maturity, moral ardor, a sense of dignity and responsibility, a complete inner rebirth of the proletarian. One cannot realize socialism with lazy, frivolous, egoistic, thoughtless, and indifferent human beings. A socialist society needs human beings from whom each one in his place is full of passion and enthusiasm for the general well-being, full of self-sacrifice and sympathy for his fellow human beings, full of courage and tenacity in order to dare to attempt the most difficult. We do not need, however, to wait perhaps a century or a decade until such a species of human beings develop. Right now, in the struggle, in the revolution, the mass of the proletarians learn the necessary idealism and soon acquire the intellectual maturity. We also need courage and endurance, inner clarity and self-sacrifice, to at all be able to lead the revolution to victory. In enlisting capable fighters for the current revolution, we are also creating the future socialist workers, which a new order requires as its fundament. The working class youth is particularly well qualified for these great tasks. As the future generation, they will indeed, quite certainly, already constitute the real foundation of the socialist economy. It is already now its job to demonstrate that it is equal to the great task of being the bearer of the humanity's future. An entire old world still needs overthrowing, and an entirely new one needs constructing. But we will do it, young friends, won't we? We will do it. Just as it says in the song, "We surely lack nothing, my wife, my child, except all that which through us prospers, to be as free as the birds, only the time." So that's the end of the Socialization of Society. We're now beginning the alternate translation, titled, "What is Bolshevism?" The revolution that has just begun can have but one outcome: realization of socialism. The working class, in order to accomplish its purpose, must, first of all, secure entire political control of the state. But to the socialist, political power is only a means to an end. It is the instrument with which labor will achieve the complete, fundamental reconstruction of our entire industrial system. Today, all wealth, the largest and most fruitful tracts of land, the mines, the mills, and the factories, belong to a small group of Junkers and private capitalists. From them, the great masses of the laboring class receive a scanty wage in return for long hours of arduous toil, hardly enough for a decent livelihood. The enrichment of a small class of idlers is the purpose and end of present-day society. To give to modern society and to modern production a new impulse and a new purpose, that is the foremost duty of the revolutionary working class. To this end, all social wealth, the land and all it produces, the factories and the mills, must be taken from their exploiting owners to become the common property of the entire people. It thus becomes the foremost duty of a revolutionary government of the working class to issue a series of decrees making all important instruments of production national property and placing them under social control. But this is only the first step. The most difficult task, the creation of an industrial state upon an entirely new foundation, has only just begun. Today, production in every manufacturing unit is conducted by the individual capitalist independently of all others. What and where commodities are to be produced, where, when, and how the finished product is to be sold, is decided by the individual capitalist owner. Nowhere does labor have the slightest influence upon these questions. It is simply the living machine that has its work to do. In a socialist state of society, all this will be changed. Private ownership of the means of production and subsistence must disappear. Production will be carried on not for the enrichment of the individual, but solely for the creation of a supply of commodities sufficient to supply the wants and needs of the working class. Accordingly, factories, mills, and farms must be operated upon an entirely new basis from a wholly different point of view. In the first place, now that production is to be carried on for the sole purpose of securing to all a more humane existence, of providing for all plentiful food, clothing, and other cultural means of subsistence, the productivity of labor must be materially increased. Farms must be made to yield richer crops. The most advanced technical processes must be introduced into the factories. Of the mines, only the most productive for the present must be intensively exploited. It follows, therefore, that the process of socialization will begin with the most highly developed industries and farmlands. We need not and will not deprive the small farmer or artisan of the bit of land or the little workshop from which he ekes out a meager existence by the work of his own hands. As time goes by, he will realize the superiority of socialized production over private ownership and will come to us of his own accord. In order that all members of society may enjoy prosperity, all must work. Only they who perform useful service to society, manual or mental, will be entitled to a share of products for the satisfaction of their needs and desires. Idleness must cease, and in its stead will come universal compulsory labor for all who are physically capable. Obviously, those who are unable to work, children, invalids, and the aged, must be supported by society. But not as it is done today, by threadbare charity. Bountiful sustenance, socialized education for the children, comfortable care for the aged, public health service for the sick. These must form all-important parts of our social structure. For the same reason, i.e., in the interest of general welfare, society will be more economical, more rational in the utilization of its commodities, its means of production, and its labor power. Waste such as we find today on every hand must cease. The production of munitions and other implements of warfare must pass out of existence, for a socialist state of society needs no tools of murder. Instead, the precious materials and the enormous labor power that were devoted to this purpose will be used for useful production. The manufacture of useless and costly foolishness for the edification of wealthy idlers will stop. Personal service will be prohibited, and the labor power thus released will find more useful and more worthy employment. While we are thus creating a nation of workers, where all must be productively employed for the general welfare, labor itself must be completely revolutionized. Today, labor in industry, on the farm and in the office, is usually a torture and a burden to the proletariat. Men and women work because they must in order to obtain the necessities of life. In a socialist state of society, where all work together for their own well-being, the health of the individual worker and their joy in their work must be conscientiously fostered and sustained. Short hours of labor not in excess of the normal human capacity must be established. Recreation and rest periods must be introduced into the workday so that all may do their share willingly and joyously. But the success of such reforms depend upon the human beings who will carry them out. Today, the capitalist with his whip stands behind the working men, in person or in the form of a manager or overseer. Hunger drives the worker to the factory, to the Junker or the farm owner. into the business office. Everywhere the employer sees to it that no time is wasted, no material squandered, that good, efficient work is done. In a socialist state of society, the capitalist with his whip disappears. Here, all working men are free and on an equal footing, working for benefit and enjoyment, tolerating no waste of social wealth, rendering honest and punctual service. To be sure, every socialist plant needs its technical superintendents who understand its workings, who are able to supervise production so that everything runs smoothly, to assure an output commensurate with the labor power expended by organizing the process of manufacture according to the most efficient methods. To ensure successful production, the individual working man must follow his instructions entirely and willingly, must maintain discipline and order, cause no friction or confusion. In a word, the working man in a socialist industrial state must show that he can work decently and diligently, without capitalists and slave drivers behind his back, that of his own volition he can maintain discipline and do his best. This demands mental discipline, moral stamina. It demands a feeling of self-respect and responsibility, a spiritual rebirth of the working man. Socialism cannot be realized with lazy, careless, egotistic, thoughtless, and shiftless men and women. A socialist state of society needs people, every one of whom is full of enthusiasm and fervor for the general welfare, full of a spirit of self-sacrifice and sympathy for his fellow men, full of courage and tenacity and the willingness to dare even against the greatest odds. But we need not wait centuries or decades until such a race of human beings shall grow up. The struggle, the revolution, will teach the proletarian masses idealism, has given them mental ripeness, courage and perseverance, clearness of purpose, and a self-sacrificing spirit, if it is to lead to victory. While we're enlisting fighters for the revolution, we're creating socialist workers for the future, workers who can become the basis of a new social state. The young people of the proletariat are ordained to carry out this great work as the true foundation of the socialist state. They must show, even now, that they are equal to the great task of bearing the future of the human race upon their shoulders. There is still an old world to be overthrown. A new world must be built. And that is the end of What is Bolshevism, the alternate translation of the piece also known as The Socialization of Society. I think that these are great, and they cover a lot of the basic points on the eve of the revolution, of what the revolutionaries are thinking about creating in the next few years as the revolution succeeds. Now, unfortunately, in this case, Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht, and others formed the Spartacist League in Germany around this time, end of World War I, and just about a year after the Russian Revolution succeeded, although it would go on to fight a revolutionary civil war for a number of years. And although the Russian Revolution was successful, the German Revolution unfortunately was not. But here we see Rosa Luxemburg, a close ally of Lenin, who differed with the Russian Bolsheviks on a few points, but agreed with them more often than not. And true to that, the vision that she presents here is very much the same vision presented by the Russian revolutionaries. We're going to get into some of those differences and the other points of agreement as we begin the mini-series of Rosa Luxemburg works that will be coming in the following weeks here on the channel, beginning, as we have done, with a piece from near the end of Luxemburg's life. She was unfortunately murdered by reactionaries during the revolutionary struggle. But before we close this piece out, I'd like to comment on a theme that is present here in the piece, which is labor discipline and the need in a socialist revolutionary society run by workers, that those workers who run society are responsible for the society. I've often seen anarchists in particular, who I think represent a great political immaturity, and other left-coms and anti-Leninist, anti-Bolshevik, quote, Marxists, who really rail against this notion of labor discipline, compulsory labor, etc. Some of these people actually seem to think that we're fighting the revolution so that no one has to work anymore. That's not the case. As Luxemburg says, in a socialist society, the nature of work, qualitatively and quantitatively, is transformed, that people aren't overworked, the work is more enjoyable, it's more humane, and ultimately people don't dread and loathe the act of working, as we do under capitalism, because we have become familiar and accustomed to what work under capitalism means. We associate it with alienation, with giving up our power principle and our creativity to somebody else, oftentimes to produce things we don't agree with, to, buy the boss a second boat or a second mansion or whatever, or we're making stuff that is basically just devoid of any social value. food with no nutritional value, etc., children's toys that promote militarism, nationalism, and all kinds of outmoded reactionary values. In short, our work in capitalism is basically oriented towards the maintenance of capitalism. And overall, people resent it, and that's understandable. But coming back to the anarchists in particular, and these sort of like anti-work people, which to be fair is not all anarchists, but I think you tend to find the most in these sort of ultra-left formations. Well, I called it immaturity, and I think it is immaturity of thought. They're just coming from a gut reaction place of what they know, sort of the you can't tell me what to do kind of thing. But we got to look beyond that to, okay, let's say we have a society that we, the working people, the people who don't own capital, are in charge of. Well, what does that require of us? And I think that Luxemburg here has expressed it brilliantly. I think it's very reasonable to people who have a more mature point of view on this topic. And it's also directly in line with what Marx and Engels wrote about what they thought a proletarian-led society would be like, what characteristics it would have, and so on. In other words, if nobody ever worked, well, we wouldn't have any of the products of labor, any of the goods or services that we associate with modern life: running water, reliable stores of food and other necessities, and all of the various electrical and electronic products that make the everyday drudgery of life that much easier to do. If we want to have these things, and I think we can agree collectively as a society that, yeah, we want those things, then we have to work to do them, at least to some extent. But we can do it differently, not under the whip of the capitalist and for primarily the capitalist benefit, but for the general welfare of society, so that everyone has enough and everyone has dignity. There might not be as much luxury per se, at least in private hands. But right now, the state of the world is, and you might be blind to this if you're just in the United States or Western Europe, which incidentally is where you tend to find a lot of the anarchists and other people. But outside of this, in a lot of the world, there are still a lot of people who don't have nearly enough. So just sort of rounding that out, let's say that, world socialist revolution did succeed. Bringing that basic standard of living up to everyone at least having enough so that they can live a dignified life, befitting a human being. Well, that's a step that we still have yet to overcome. Socialism can take us there, capitalism cannot. So to you, the listener, what's your choice? What's your attitude toward this? Are you lazy, careless, egoistic, thoughtless, shiftless? Or do you have a socialist spirit, full of enthusiasm and fervor for the general welfare, full of a spirit of self-sacrifice and sympathy for proletarians all over the world, full of courage and tenacity and the willingness to dare, even against the greatest odds, to fight for this new world?